Have you ever wondered why the same toxic patterns keep finding you, no matter how many times you walk away? It's not just a coincidence. It's not bad luck. And it's not always about them. Sometimes, the storm doesn't pass because you're still leaving your door open to it. We spend years trying to fix people, confront disrespect, or explain our worth to those who never truly listen. But Stoic philosophy offers a radically different path, one that doesn't start with words, but with energy, with clarity, with stillness. Stoics believe that real strength doesn't come from controlling others, but from mastering yourself. There's a silent shift that changes everything, not through shouting or fighting back, but through becoming unshakably grounded in who you are. When that happens, people who once drained your peace begin to disappear, quietly, without force. This video will walk you through 7 profound inner transformations, backed by neuroscience, guided by Stoicism, that will make toxic people feel like they've lost access to you. Because in truth, they have. You'll learn how to stop explaining yourself, how to build emotional immunity, how to stop bending your boundaries without even speaking a word. If you've ever felt exhausted by chaos you didn't ask for, know this: you are not alone, and you are not powerless. Let's begin. If this resonates with you, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your story in the comments below. Someone out there needs your voice too. 1. Real power begins in silence. They expect you to react, to argue, to explain yourself. That's how they stay connected to you, not through truth or respect, but through emotional entanglement. And for a long time, you may have believed that standing up for yourself meant saying more, speaking louder, and confronting what felt wrong. But what if the real strength doesn't come from a louder voice, but from a quieter center? Silence, when born from clarity, is not weakness. It is present. It is restraint forged by discipline. It is the inner decision to no longer be baited, no longer be pulled into battles that exhaust your nervous system and cost your peace. And this is where the Stoics were radical. Not in their emotionless detachment, but in their mastery of reaction. They didn't teach avoidance, they taught alignment. To stand still inside while the world around you demands chaos is not passivity. It is power in its most grounded form. We live in a time where reaction is currency. Your availability, your opinions, your need to respond quickly, these are exploited, often without you even noticing. Think about how often you feel compelled to reply to a message that disturbed you, a comment that triggered you, or a tone of voice that made you feel small. It happens quickly, instinctively. Your heart rate rises, your breath shortens, and before you know it, you've given your energy away. Again. But something changes when you no longer see silence as absence, but as architecture. When you recognize that every time you don't respond to provocation, your body is learning a new rhythm. Your nervous system begins to understand. Not every threat deserves a reaction. Not every discomfort requires a fix. Not every person deserves your explanation. Instead of reinforcing fear, you are rehearsing stability. And over time, your internal wiring changes. The Stoics would call this coherence, when your thoughts, values, and actions move in unity, not contradiction. Stillness, then, is not emptiness. It is protection. It's not about shutting down. It's about staying open without bleeding energy. And this shift begins the moment you stop fighting to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you. The moment you stop clarifying your silence to those addicted to drama. When you stop offering emotional commentary on every perceived slight, you begin the slow, quiet work of protecting your attention. That is where power lives. Not in the force of what you say, but in the clarity of what you no longer respond to. This is not about being cold, it's about conserving. Not about ignoring conflict, but choosing where your presence belongs. Because the truth is, every argument you don't enter, every insult you don't return, every passive-aggressive tone you don't mirror, these are not just acts of avoidance. They are acts of sovereignty. You are saying to yourself, I choose peace over performance, integrity over impulse. You may not always see the results right away. In fact, the people around you might become louder, more erratic, more desperate for the version of you that used to react. But stay still, because silence is not a retreat. It is the language of someone who has nothing left to prove. It is how you step out of the old patterns that kept you emotionally available to chaos. If you want to begin practicing this kind of strength, Start with breath. When provoked, don't reply. Breathe. Feel your feet. Notice your heartbeat. Don't move from your center. Let the silence stretch longer than it used to. The discomfort you feel in that pause is your nervous system adjusting, healing, and becoming immune to the pull of dysfunction. And the more you do this, the more natural it becomes. Soon, silence won't just be something you choose. It will be who you are. And the people who relied on your reactivity will no longer find their place. Not because you pushed them away, but because you changed what you allow to stay. 2. Freedom begins where permission ends. Sometimes the most dangerous kind of control is not what others do to you, but what you quietly allow without realizing it. It starts subtly. The way you feel the need to explain yourself to avoid being misunderstood, how you keep replying to someone just to keep the peace, or how you stay in conversations that drain you because walking away feels impolite. These aren't just habits. They're permissions. Silent agreements that tell others your energy is available, your boundaries negotiable, and your peace secondary. You might think you're just being kind, that you're keeping things calm. But deep down, your nervous system is constantly negotiating its safety in places that don't honor it. The truth is, every time you overextend to prove you're not selfish, every time you absorb discomfort to avoid someone else's reaction, you're giving away a piece of your authority. And toxic people don't need force to enter your life. They just need these tiny invitations. Openings. Signals that say you will stay even if it hurts. You will explain even when it costs clarity. You will bend even if it breaks you. But Stoicism doesn't begin with saying no to others. It begins with saying yes to yourself, fully, calmly, and without apology. When Epictetus wrote, "No person is free who is not master of himself," he wasn't pointing to chains. He was pointing to the impulse to please, to be liked, to belong at the cost of one's values. And that kind of servitude happens in the mind, not in the body. Freedom, then, is not an external escape. It's the quiet internal act of withdrawing permission. You don't have to announce it. You don't have to explain it. You just stop giving your energy to what weakens you. When you stop justifying your silence, when you no longer clarify your choices for people committed to misunderstanding you, something shifts. You begin to preserve your mental space. You start living by your own emotional rhythm. And those who relied on your availability feel it instantly. Let's make this real. Imagine you're in a conversation and the other person begins criticizing you in the form of veiled sarcasm. In the past, you might have laughed awkwardly, then followed up with a thoughtful explanation to fix the tension. That moment feels small, but it's massive. It tells the other person that your boundary is movable, that your inner peace will always make room for their chaos. Now imagine doing something different. Not cold, not rude, just still. You don't explain, don't correct, don't engage. You hold your posture, breathe, and let the moment pass without giving it more than it deserves. That's not withdrawal. That's wisdom. That's where permission ends and freedom begins. This kind of freedom rewires your nervous system. It teaches your body that peace doesn't come from controlling how others see you. It comes from how steadily you hold yourself when they don't. And the more you do this, the clearer your energy becomes. You're no longer signaling openness to manipulation. You're no longer subconsciously saying, "Please like me, even if it costs me." Instead, your presence begins to express, "I choose peace, not performance. I choose respect, not reaction." Toxic people will notice. They may test the old pattern, sensing that you're no longer playing your part. But they will quickly realize that the access they once had no longer exists. Not because you built a wall, but because you've built a self that no longer waits for external permission to feel safe. You've stopped negotiating with chaos. You've stopped paying for belonging with your silence. If you want to start small, begin with one sentence you no longer owe, one response you don't need to give, one explanation you can gently replace with silence. These are not dramatic actions. They're quiet recalibrations of power. And in the stillness that follows, you'll feel it. The quiet return of yourself, the beginning of real emotional independence. And that is where freedom lives. Not in what you say to others, but in what you finally stop saying to yourself. 3. Rewire your brain with calm. The mind learns fast, but not always wisely. Each time you respond to stress with panic, to conflict with over-explanation, or to manipulation with guilt, you're training your brain to believe that safety comes from urgency, from emotional overdrive, from abandoning yourself to fix someone else's instability. And the more you repeat that pattern, the more natural it feels. Not because it's right, but because it's familiar. But what happens when you interrupt that pattern? Not with force, but with stillness. Your nervous system is constantly shaping itself around your responses. It records what you pay attention to, how you react, when you brace for impact. When you live on high alert, always decoding tone, anticipating conflict, trying to get ahead of discomfort, you're not just mentally exhausted, you're biologically conditioned to live in tension. Your system begins to confuse vigilance with strength, anxiety with care, and survival with love. That's not emotional resilience, that's quiet burnout. Stoic wisdom offers a radical reframe. Strength is not the ability to absorb more chaos, it's the courage to choose less of it. When Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events," he wasn't offering philosophy. He was offering permission to reclaim your attention. And neuroscience agrees. Every time you stay calm when provoked, pause before reacting, or breathe through the discomfort instead of fighting it, you're not just showing willpower, you're rewiring your brain. Imagine this. Someone says something designed to provoke you. In the past, your body would have tensed. You'd jump in, defend yourself, maybe try to prove them wrong. But now you take one slow breath. You ground yourself by noticing the weight of your feet. You feel the emotion rise, but you don't let it lead. You remain still, not out of fear, but from choice. That one moment, that tiny shift in reaction sends a new signal to your nervous system. Safety lives here. You no longer chase validation. You no longer need to perform to be accepted. You are now the source of it. This is not about suppression. You're not bottling things up. You're learning how to slow down enough to see clearly. Because when you're hijacked by reaction, you lose access to discernment. But when you lead with stillness, you gain time. Time to think, time to choose, time to stand with your values instead of your fears. And over time, this repetition builds a new emotional rhythm, one that doesn't collapse under stress, one that recognizes which emotions are visitors and which are truths, one that stops letting other people's noise drown out your own clarity. The most common mistake people make is believing they need to change their whole environment to feel peace. They rearrange people, cut off relationships, avoid confrontation. But the real work begins with how you meet life, not how you escape it. If chaos keeps following you, it's not because you're cursed. It's because your system still knows how to respond to chaos better than it knows how to stand in peace. But that can change, moment by moment, breath by breath. Start with one habit. When your heart rate rises in conversation, when your chest tightens or your hands clench, don't act. Notice. Let that moment pass through you without latching on. Let silence do the sorting. Let stillness be the language you choose. This isn't a spiritual performance. It's biological repair. It's emotional unlearning. And the more you do it, the more your inner world becomes a place of safety, not performance. Eventually, those who once had power over your emotions will find nothing to grab onto. Not because you fought them, but because your nervous system no longer dances for them. You don't even feel the hook. You've outgrown the bait. And in that calm, you become untouchable. Not because you built walls, but because you built depth. 4. Detachment is not coldness. You can love people deeply and still not let them shake your center. You can care and still refuse to carry what isn't yours. Emotional detachment is one of the most misunderstood strengths in human relationships, because to those who feed on your constant availability, your clarity looks like distance, and your boundaries feel like rejection. But what if detachment isn't about being less human, but about becoming more whole? To detach doesn't mean to turn cold. It means to see clearly. It means you no longer place your piece on the auction block, hoping someone else will bid high enough to treat it well. Detachment, in its most honest form, is choosing not to participate in cycles that damage your nervous system. It's a discipline, a practice of refusing to be tangled in someone else's storm, even when you love them. Especially when you love them. We've been taught that to be good is to be involved, to be attentive is to be responsive, and to care means you must always be emotionally available. But that version of love comes with a cost. Your internal clarity gets clouded by their chaos. You lose your baseline, and without even noticing, you begin to mirror the instability you once tried to fix. That's not compassion. That's collapse. Stoicism offers another way. It asks you to stand close to others without absorbing their turbulence. It invites you to remain present but not porous. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." That retreat is not escapism, it's preparation. The Stoic doesn't withdraw because he is cold. He withdraws to preserve discernment, to return to interaction with intention, not impulse. So when you feel pulled by guilt, by manipulation, by someone's unspoken expectation, you don't have to confront, you don't have to explain. You simply hold your ground. You notice the need to react, rise up, and let it pass like a wave that no longer drowns you. That's not shutting down. That's sovereignty. Imagine you're on the phone with someone who often speaks to you in a tone laced with control. They question your decisions, they fish for reactions, they test your boundaries with subtle barbs. In the past, you might have defended yourself. You might have tried to make them see your intentions, but now you remain calm. You no longer meet them in that emotional theater. You speak only when clarity is needed. You say less but with weight, and then you hang up with your peace still intact. This isn't about emotional withdrawal, it's about emotional refinement. You're no longer performing sensitivity, you're living inner strength. When someone tries to hook you with guilt or draw you into reactivity, you're no longer moved, not because you feel nothing, but because you've learned not to act from that place. Your presence remains, but your energy doesn't bleed. A common mistake is thinking that being emotionally available all the time is the highest form of love. It's not. What matters more is being stable, honest, and self-respecting. Because if you're always rescuing others from their discomfort, you may never notice how far you've drifted from your own center. So here's where the work begins. The next time you feel the urge to explain yourself to someone who isn't listening, pause. Instead of defending, breathe. Instead of rushing to repair, wait. This pause, this soft, powerful resistance, is how you break the pattern. It's how your body learns that stillness doesn't mean weakness, it means wisdom. And slowly, you become the kind of presence that others can't provoke, can't twist, can't use. Eventually, those who depended on your emotional pliability will feel the change. They'll search for the old you, the one who danced to their rhythm, and find silence. Not because you abandoned them, but because you stopped abandoning yourself. And in that silence, they'll either rise to meet you or fade. Either way, you'll remain grounded, unshaken, fully present, yet untouched. That is detachment, not coldness, but clarity in its most powerful form. 5. Peace is a discipline, not luck. Peace doesn't simply arrive one day like a gift handed to you when life becomes easier. It isn't found in quiet moments by chance, nor does it last when built on avoidance. Peace is not the absence of noise, it's the presence of clarity. And clarity is not a condition of the world, it's a condition of your choices. You've likely been told that peace comes when circumstances change, when others finally understand you, or when everything around you calms down. But what if none of that ever happens? What if peace isn't something you wait for, but something you train for? The Stoics didn't associate tranquility with external comfort. They trained themselves daily to meet discomfort without losing their balance. Seneca wrote that no man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself. In that spirit, peace becomes an active stance, not a passive reward. It's an ongoing discipline of the mind and body, a deliberate refusal to participate in emotional chaos, even when it's familiar. Especially when it's familiar. Your nervous system, like any system, responds to repetition. If your daily rhythm includes overreacting, pleasing others at the expense of your truth, or chasing validation, then your brain wires itself for emotional instability. The constant checking of your phone, the overthinking after difficult conversations, the replaying of what you could have said, these become patterns of unrest. And over time, you mistake those patterns for personality. You start saying things like, "I'm just sensitive," or "I just care too much," when in truth, your system has simply adapted to the emotional environment you've trained it to survive in. But peace begins in small refusals. when you walk away from a conversation that tightens your chest, when you decide not to reply to that message that pokes at your need to be understood, when you say no, not out of fear, but out of alignment. Each act of restraint teaches your body something powerful. Not every disruption deserves your energy. You are not obligated to attend every emotional fire that someone else lights. You don't need to justify your peace to people addicted to dysfunction. Let's say you're in a family dynamic where someone constantly criticizes you under the guise of concern. They might say things like, "I'm only saying this because I care," but their words leave you smaller, not stronger. In the past, you'd explain, defend, and try to smooth things over. You'd leave the conversation questioning your own worth. But now, you pause. You respond calmly, or not at all. You leave the space when necessary, not to punish them, but to protect what you've been building internally. That's discipline, not distance. That's peace, not pride. The mistake many people make is thinking peace requires permission, that once the world slows down, they'll feel calm. But in truth, the world doesn't slow down. It asks more. And your nervous system, if you don't train it, keeps bracing for impact, even when nothing is wrong. Peace is earned through the repeated practice of not giving your clarity away to things that don't align. It's built through rituals, your morning stillness, your breath before you speak, your decision not to enter a room already burning. Stoicism teaches that peace is not passive. It's an act of resistance in a world that constantly pulls you into noise. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." That freedom shows itself in the space between stimulus and response. The space where you feel something rise but you don't let it lead. That's not suppression, that's refinement. Start where you are. Choose one thing today you will not react to, one conversation you will not overanalyze, one place where you choose quiet over performance. Let that moment of restraint become a seed. Water it tomorrow, and again the next day. Not all at once, but steadily, because peace doesn't come like a wave. It grows like a tree, and every quiet act of discipline is a root holding it in place. 6. Stop explaining, start standing. Not every misunderstanding deserves your correction. Not every question requires an answer. The need to explain yourself constantly, especially to those who twist your words or question your peace, is a silent drain. It starts small. You clarify why you didn't reply right away. You over-explain why you chose to rest instead of attend. You justify your distance, your silence, your change. But what if explaining is no longer a sign of clarity, but of compromise? When your energy becomes consumed with proving that you're not wrong, not distant, not selfish, then the people around you are no longer responding to who you are, but to the image you're forced to manage. And in managing that image, your peace erodes. Your voice flattens. You begin walking on emotional eggshells, not because you are unsure of your truth, but because you fear how your truth will be perceived. That is the emotional captivity Stoicism helps you break. The Stoics held no interest in performance. They didn't argue with noise. They trained themselves to live in alignment with virtue, not approval. Epictetus reminded us, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. The moment you explain your peace to those committed to misunderstanding it, you place your emotional clarity on trial. You've shifted from living to defending. And no amount of explanation ever satisfies someone who feeds on your need to be understood. You may have grown up thinking that silence is rude, that emotional distance means disconnection. Maybe you were taught that being kind meant being available, even at the cost of your own mental stability. So you explained yourself out of guilt. You clarified to keep the peace. You apologized to avoid discomfort. And at some point, you mistook that pattern for maturity. But maturity is not about over-explaining. It's about inner steadiness, the kind that doesn't beg to be validated. Imagine someone close to you accuses you of being too distant lately. They frame your calm as coldness, your space as rejection. In the past, you might have panicked. You'd rush to explain how it's not what it looks like, that you're just tired or stressed or going through something. You'd soften your boundaries just to be seen again. But now you choose stillness. You respond without defense. You don't justify your silence because you know it's not a weapon. It's a way of preserving alignment. That shift may confuse them, but it centers you. because you are no longer asking for approval to feel whole. The most dangerous habit isn't anger, it's overclarity. When you constantly explain, you teach others that your truth is negotiable, that your peace can be poked, debated, and redefined by someone else's opinion. But when you stop explaining, something radical happens. Your stillness becomes your stance. You no longer plead for understanding, you embody it. And in that stillness, you begin to notice who leans in respectfully, and who only stayed because you were always explaining. This does not mean becoming silent out of resentment. It means speaking only when your truth is ready, not when your guilt is triggered. It means using fewer words, not to hide, but to remain sovereign. Stoicism teaches that your energy is not public property. Your values are not up for negotiation every time someone feels uncomfortable with your growth. What matters more than being understood is being true, even if that truth is met with silence, confusion, or resistance. So the next time you feel the urge to explain, pause. Ask yourself, am I seeking connection or control? Am I clarifying out of love or fear? Let that pause become a gate. Let your breath take the space your words used to fill. And let your choices speak for you quietly, consistently. Because those who truly see you don't need the performance. They feel your peace. And those who don't, they will either adjust or drift. Either way, you remain unshaken, centered, and finally free from the burden of having to explain the quiet truth of who you've become. 7. Misalignment makes them vanish. People don't always leave because you tell them to. They leave when they can no longer recognize who you've become. When your energy no longer matches their chaos, when your silence no longer invites reaction, when your presence no longer gives them a foothold, they begin to fade. Not because you pushed them away, but because the alignment they once fed on is gone. And that shift doesn't happen through confrontation. It begins inside you, quietly, the moment you stop resonating with what used to drain you. Relationships, especially toxic ones, thrive on shared emotional patterns. They're not built on logic, they're sustained by habit. A habit of reactivity, of guilt, of seeking closure, of staying longer than your peace allows. When someone knows you'll always respond, always explain, always play your role, they don't need force to stay close. They need you to stay familiar. But what happens when you evolve past those patterns? When you stop reacting the same way, stop seeking the same validation, stop carrying the same guilt? The dynamic breaks not with noise, but with stillness. You may not notice it at first. You'll just start responding differently. You'll feel less urgency to fix, less anxiety to be liked. You'll no longer prepare explanations for your boundaries or overthink your silence. Your rhythm changes, and because energy is deeply perceptive, people feel this before they can name it. They begin to sense that the emotional hooks they once used don't catch anything anymore. The door they used to walk through now leads to stillness, not to reaction. And to someone who thrives on emotional access, that stillness feels like a closed gate. Stoic philosophy frames this not as rejection, but as refinement. You're not cutting people off, you're cutting off what no longer aligns with your growth. You don't have to announce your transformation, you just have to live it. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. That shift, from explanation to embodiment, is what removes you from toxic patterns more effectively than any dramatic goodbye ever could. Now imagine someone from your past, maybe a colleague, a family member, or an old friend, reaches out expecting the same emotional availability you once gave them. Maybe they start with subtle complaints, maybe they use guilt, maybe they test your silence. In the past, you would have responded instantly, felt responsible, and tried to repair. But now, you don't rush. You breathe. You let the space speak louder than your words. You no longer react because you no longer resonate. They'll feel it. They may get louder, try harder, and escalate their patterns. But without access, their efforts become echoes. The mistake most people make is thinking they need to confront, to explain, to make others understand why they're choosing peace. But peace needs no defense. Alignment doesn't require permission. And those who truly value your presence won't need the old version of you to stay close. They'll grow with you, or they'll walk away. Either way, you stay rooted. You don't need to force closure. You don't need to prove you've changed. Change speaks for itself. It speaks in how you respond to tension, in how you honor your nervous system, in how you choose what conversations to engage in and which ones to let pass like distant weather. Emotional evolution is not about isolation, it's about precision. You're no longer available to every story, every projection, every loop. Start practicing this by noticing the conversations that leave you drained. Not because they're hard, but because they no longer reflect who you are. Don't make a dramatic exit. Just slow your response. Let your silence reflect your clarity. Let your calm show what no argument ever could. Over time, those who relied on the old rhythm will drift, and in their place, space will open. For people, for energy, for experiences that match your new frequency. That's not a loss. That's liberation. The kind of liberation you don't need to announce, only embody. Quietly, deeply, and without turning back. You don't have to fight toxic people to make them leave. You only have to stop being someone who matches their chaos. What we've explored today isn't theory. It's a quiet, daily practice. It's a shift in how you breathe, how you hold your ground, how you protect your energy without saying a word. And that shift begins not when others change, but when you do, gently, consistently, with full awareness of who you no longer wish to be. You've seen that real power doesn't shout. It stands, it listens, it withdraws permission from what no longer deserves access. From silence to emotional detachment, from the discipline of peace to the refusal to explain yourself, each practice leads to the same outcome, inner freedom. And freedom, in the Stoic sense, is not about living without problems. It's about responding to life in a way that aligns with your values, not your wounds. Each day gives you another chance to return to your center. One breath at a time, one pause before a reaction. In one conversation, you no longer need to explain your worth. You don't need to perfect it. You only need to begin, again and again, because every small act of restraint rewires your nervous system. Every moment of stillness rebuilds your sense of self. And over time, the people who once disturbed your peace will no longer find anything to hold on to. I invite you to carry these practices with you. Test them, live them. See who stays, see who fades. And most importantly, notice the quiet strength that begins to grow inside you. If you've already started walking this path, share your story in the comments. Your stillness might help someone else find their own.